Good morning, good evening, good night. We are back with Empathetic Educators, and I'm so excited to have the guest on the show today with our nerdy networking and just talking about all different things about the brain and neuroscience. And I'm really excited to learn with this person today. So let's get ourselves on the road. So we are back with season 4 of Empathetic Educators today, and I'm just so excited to be talking about all these different things. And for Empathetic Educators, we have the powers within your grasp. So it's within your growth, within your relationships, within your accountability, within your challenge, within your systems, which are our topic today, and within your perspectives. So we're going to touch on all these things today within our conversation with our guest. And so without further ado, let's get our guest on the show. Welcome, Kathryn. It's so good to have you on the show today. And as a person who loves New Zealand, like I said, I love hearing your voice. I love hearing you on the show. So yeah, tell our audience a little bit about you and a little bit what you're about too.
Yes, so great to be here. I will try and speak a little bit slower than I normally do, but I do get excited and speak quickly. So I'm from New Zealand and have lived in New Zealand all my life. I did luckily travel, so I have got around the world quite a bit. Lived in the UK, worked in there, worked around Europe, lived in Egypt for a year, which was pretty amazing. And as you can see, the papyrus behind me. And did that. But now I'm in New Zealand, so I am raising 2 adolescents. So I also understand the adolescent brain development, which is very helpful in my everyday interactions with my beautiful children. I train around the country. I'm very lucky I get around and train a lot of organizations who work with children who have experienced environmental trauma. So I understand how the brain is impacted by that environment. One, so we can understand it and we can work better with children, adolescents, adults who have been impacted. But secondly, to work at how we then work with them to change their brains, because we can change and we can make a difference, but we have to do it the right way. So that's what I do, which I feel incredibly lucky doing.
Yeah, it was so great chatting to you just about like all the different paths that you've taken just before we came on the show. And it's just, I like you say, I'm so passionate about, as a teacher, we impact the brain and we work with the brain every single day. But as a teacher, I didn't feel prepared actually coming into my teaching degree because I wasn't taught about the ins and outs and how things react. So it's just really great to have you on the show to go a little bit deeper with that conversation as well. So thank you for coming on. And we also have people coming in live. So we have Shannon coming in from Central California. Excited for today. She's always on our nerdy networking chat. So it's really good to have you on the show today, Shannon. And we also have Mel coming in. Saw you on Twitter. So join the conversation. So yeah, if you're listening or if you're watching, then you can let us know how you're feeling about the chat or what you feel about neuroscience as well. So before we start, we're gonna every single week I work with Erica Sandstrom, and a lot of what we do is about the breathing techniques. So we know that whenever we're getting ourselves ready or getting ourselves ready in the zone for what we're doing, breathing is really important. So we're just going to take this moment today, just a little minute of like a little breathing bubble where we all practice the breathing bubble together and just get into the zone. So just give us a little minute for yourself. If you're listening or if you're watching, just to practice your breathing as we go along. So let's go. So yeah, that's just a little moment for us to just kind of have a little breath, and it helps me at the start of the show just to calm myself and get, like you say, I'm an Irish person obviously, so my accent gets really fast and really excited whenever I'm talking to, so just calms me down and brings me into what we're actually doing today. So that's really nice. So our first question today, like we said, you're talking about your neuroscience and everything that you're involved with. And I always have to look at the training that you've had, because it sometimes gets me tongue tied whenever I'm looking at things. And it says, what is the neurosequential model of therapeutics, and what does it mean for teachers and parents? So this is a little visual of the neurosequential model that we have been talking about. And could you just let us know like what your training is and what it means for what we're actually doing today? Just give a little background.
Yeah, well, essentially, when we're teachers, we're trying to teach the top parts. We see that cortical part of the brain. The cortical part of the brain can be abstract. And when you think about reading itself, that's an abstract task. You need to get little squiggly shapes and you need to put them into an order, and you need to work out what they represent and then put them all together into a sentence in a cohesive space. So that's abstract. Maths needs all of those before and after, and logic and rationality. So we are trying to teach the cortex. What we understand with the neurosequential model is unless the lower brains, the lower parts of the brain, is calm and safe, they're taking up all the energy, because that's our survival part of the brain. And so anything in the environment that's signaling to the lower brain that there is any sort of danger, and by the way, it doesn't have to be actual danger, it just has to be perceived danger by that individual. If the lower brains perceive danger, they are requiring energy, and the energy isn't in the cortex. So if you've got a child in class and they're worried about when they get home, they forgot to do this and they might get in trouble, or they smell the teacher's cologne or the perfume and that reminds them internally of something, their lower brain's taking the energy, and whatever we're teaching in class is bouncing. It's bouncing because the cortex isn't available. So that once we start to understand that, we understand the importance of relationships, of sensory things in class, of making sure we take brain breaks, of making sure we have allowances of movement. Some kids want quiet, some kids want noise. We've got to allow the safety and calmness of the lower brains so that the upper brain can engage. That's the simple overview of the neurosequential model for teaching.
And I think Oh, you're back on.
Sorry, was that me or you? My apologies. Yeah.
It's fine. It went did something happen? Oh, that's never happened before on live. That's never happened before.
It's a moment of tolerable stress which builds resilience.
I know, literally it is. That's us back on. That's a shame. Oh, I think we're live. Oh, we're back. Shannon just said we're back on live. Fantastic.
Thank you for letting us know. So resilience is built through multiple moments of tolerable stress. So that was just an example of resilience building.
And you can see you can see my body, you can see my body reaction, you can see us all in there, yeah. There we go. That's never happened before on the sign, but that's okay. That's us doing what we have to do. So let's go back onto the topic of resilience and stress and fight or flight.
So did you get that? Did that all come through, the empathic understanding the cortex space?
Yes, it came on. It just came on as soon as we finished. Well, my side of it anyway. As soon as we finished, it was just us coming off, and you were saying about how we have to make sure that we're looking at the brain stem. So obviously, I am in my brain moment at the minute, trying to get back into my cortical brain, which is what you were talking about. So, so yeah, it's just really good to have like that kind of understanding for me, and even just feeling like this. You know, like being in Japan has taught me a lot about how my body reacts towards not understanding things. So say like whenever I'm trying to like find out something about like how do I get somewhere and everything's in Japanese and I have to try and navigate that puts me into a stressful moment, and I'm trying to think to my kids, I'm thinking, what does that do for them if they don't know where to turn to, especially with my bilingual learners. I'm really empathizing with them now at the minute, because they're obviously in a state of, what am I doing? Where's my focus meant to be? And so it just really helps that empathy piece, actually understanding the kids and understanding that, like, that space as well. So yeah, it's a really important fact that we're actually bringing into the conversation too.
Absolutely. And just to put in context, you, I'm assuming, have a very developed green brain cortex. I call it, sorry, when I refer to green brain, I am talking about the cortex. I just changed my language a bit. And so you've got a very developed cortex.
Mm-hmm.
So can you see how long it takes you to get back into there and to start rationalizing and realizing? Well, then we put into the context of our younger kids who don't have that full cortex, the ability of futuristic and logical thought as much. And then you overlay that with kids who have had moments of constant stress, and they haven't really developed their cortex, and their lower brains are overdeveloped. So, you put you in that space and it takes a long time to get back. And then we just overlay all those other variables and we go, our poor kids, some of our kids are sitting there just trying to get themselves calm. And that's their daily task, not learning ABC, just getting through the day without being too overactivated.
And that's what you just talked about, that language, because obviously I learned about you whenever you were in my school in Stonefield School, when you came and talked to us, and I love that language that you talked about, the red brain, green brain conversations. Maybe just give a little insight into that, because that's so good.
So I simplify it, and it's Dr. Perry's neurosequential model that you saw there. But all those lower brains, so the brainstem, the diencephalon, the limbic area, all of those, I just put into a red brain, and I contextualize it being a 2-year-old, being selfish and impulsive and irrational. And then the green brain is the cortex, because that's the difference. But I talk about the continuum between. And if we have any danger around us, like I said, it's the survival emotional brain that's processing that. And the more energy that the red brain requires, the less the green brain has. So when we look at someone whose shoulders are tense and they're licking their lips and they're in that fight-flight response, or they're potentially going into that dissociative down response, we assume in that space that the green brain isn't very available. And so when we ask someone to, hey, remember what I told you yesterday? And it's like, well, actually, that's the green brain's job, to remember the past, to go to the future. Hey, if you don't do that, you won't be allowed to go to swimming with us next week. The green brain needs to be available for that. And if red brain's taking the energy, then they say, I don't care. I didn't want to go to swimming anyway. And it's their favorite thing. And they're like, but I hate swimming. And you're like, I don't think so. But do you see, we're becoming a 2-year-old selfish, impulsive activator rather than a thinker, processor, logicizer. So it's just that energy transfer. And I love thinking about where we are on that continuum. Us first, so we can regulate the child, or adolescent, adult.
That's what, like you say, like that's the more I'm learning about the neuroscience side of it, I'm like, oh, that's why I'm reacting that way. Do you know, like even there now, whenever that happened, I was completely in survival mode. And my brain was like, what's going on? But then like it does, like then you can kind of feel yourself. The more you're aware of it, like you said, it's not completely like crazy on not understanding things. Actually, the more we can become aware of it, the more it's really easy to try and take in and try and understand that space too, because then you can really relate to yourself and say, oh, I'm really in my green brain at the minute. I can really feel myself feeling good, feeling great, feeling present. But then whenever you're in your red brain, it's like, meow, 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 what's going on? And you can feel yourself like going in between those stages too. So it's really good for my vocabulary from my learners, red brain, green brain. But it's just really nice to remind myself whenever I'm in those places too. So yeah, it's a really nice little takeaway for it.
And just by acknowledging for ourselves, it helps, doesn't it? Just by saying, I'm in my red brain, it can be, oh, okay, now I get why I'm doing it. And then you suddenly come out of it because you can sort of forgive yourself. You know it's normal. It's survival based. It's not because there's something wrong with me.
Yeah, and just like being okay, and it helps. That's what I loved about it, because after we had your chat, actually, me and my colleagues in Stonefields, we actually made little visuals, and I'll put it actually in the tagline for this because it might be good for other teachers if they want to use them. And we made little visuals for red brain, green brain, and we actually used them with the learners. And the amount of times where they didn't have the vocabulary maybe to express themselves or express what they were feeling, and then they were able to say, "Oh, I'm in my red brain," "Oh, I'm in my green brain," and we have parents coming and just being like, what's she talking about? She's in her red brain. But it was really nice then to like bring parents on board and like get them to understand what terminology we were using, and like give them vocabulary to use with their learners too. So it was just, yeah, it was a really nice thank you for that takeaway, because it really did. It's so simple, but yet so transformative in actually what we're doing with the learners too. Yeah. And I think Shannon just asked the question, is it possible for trauma or external circumstances to make us get stuck in the red brain mode? Is it harder for people to actually get out of that the more trauma they're experiencing? Yeah, what's
Yeah, and of course we're generalizing here. So there's always outliers. There's people that can have massive trauma and for lots of variable reasons they come out okay, right? So generalizing. But yeah, fascinating. I work with a gentleman quite a lot at conferences, and he took this information into a prison, or he quite often does. And he was sitting down after the red brain, green brain talk, and this big fella comes up to him, and my colleague's quite short anyway. So, and he's like, and this guy goes, "Hey, Peel," like this, and Peel goes, "Yes, what?" And this prisoner said, "Mate, I don't think I've ever been in my green brain." And you know how, first of all, the language, talking about the language, how cool is it he had a language, but how sad is it? And you're absolutely right, Shannon. People can get to the point. So if you think about the brain, it's survival focused. And if you're a little child, a little bubby, and you're not getting fed, or you're not getting responded to, or you're getting yelled at, or there's not yelled at, there's yelling around you, your brain is saying, what do I need right now for survival? And it's like, you be alert. You be alert, and you keep your red brain focused, and you don't trust anybody, don't form relationships. Because can you see that's significantly better if your world is growing up in that space? If we don't change anything, and we have to actively change it at that point, then yes, your red brain will keep practicing. And I talk about sprinters and marathon runners training their body physically via a message from their brain. And what you're asking is, can someone marathon run all their life? Yes, they actually can. Because unless we make them feel safe, that brain never gets to that green brain. And we're being really generalistic. Obviously, parts of the green brain will grow without that. We're talking about those empathic, logical, rational. So yes, you can get so ingrained in that red brain. First of all, you stay there. But second of all, you need practice to learn things. So if you've never, as a baby, you watch how often they look at people's faces and they go, oh, they're happy, or they're confused. If you think about being stressed, you're not going to be looking into people's faces. So you don't learn facial expression. So a lot of our kids, adolescents, adults find it difficult to read faces, to read those nonverbals, to consider themselves, to have empathy. And all of those things are learnt because we're present. If you're not present in the green brain, you're alert, in that red brain. So absolutely, there is the potential we could live in our red brain throughout our life.
And like you say, it's like that survival, and then that's what I love about learning about this as well. It's like you said, it's not you're not bad if that's what you are. That's just what your experience has given you to actually become that person that you're at right now. And that's what I love about like the idea of like the growth of your brain. So you can change your pathways, you can change your networks, you can adapt your networks and adapt your brain as well. So yeah, it's such a, that's what Keisha's saying. It's like loving this conversation, especially anchoring it to itself before applying it to students. And I think like it's just, it helps us recognize as well, because this all came from, I was teaching in a London school in Hackney, and there was a lot of things going on for those learners I wouldn't even wish on my worst enemy, like for these kids, like these 5-year-old, 6-year-old kids. And I think that's what taught me. It was like they're not reacting the way I've had experience with learners who maybe aren't dealing with those type of things at home before they even come to school. And that's what was making me, like, that empathy piece really came to life in that space, because I was like, what's actually going on for them? Like, why are they reacting that way? What is, because children don't naturally react that way. What's happened for them to actually respond in those settings too? And yeah, like you say, it's just really helpful to like have that empathy for our learners. Then we can activate the different parts that we're looking at as well. So yeah, it's like you say, before we came on, you say you love your job because you get to find out all these things. It's just such a cool space to actually try and activate and understand those spaces too. And I think like this leads on to the next question of creating those pathways and what happens whenever we're actually developing the brain, basically. And so I loved your TED talk of neuroscience device zombies, and we'll go on to that part of it after. But maybe could you let us know a little bit about myelination and how it impacts the foundations for our learners. So we'll talk about your show a little bit after, but just like that myelination, what is that? And yeah, what does it mean for us?
Yeah, and again, it's sort of simplifying the brain, but in fact, our brain is sort of simple. It's cells and connections. And when we're born, our babies, human babies, are born with their cells very unconnected. A lot of animals are fully connected, and they can't adapt. You can't take a polar bear and raise it in the desert because it's already pre-programmed. So we're very malleable when we're born. People call our babies resilient. They're not resilient. They're malleable because the brain is so unconnected. If we build resilience, they become resilient very quickly because that's a sensitive time of building resilience. However, they're malleable. And so the experiences decide what connections form. So cells connect, but when they first connect, they're very hard to work on because it's like baby turning over. They're looking at their hand and they're looking at their foot. They're trying to turn over, and then they keep doing it again and again and again. Eating, even with us with our times tables. My daughter's just learnt to drive, so parallel parking again and again and again. Our brain, if you learn something today and you repeat it, that word myelination, you will create a myelinated network about myelination. And so what myelin is actually produced by cells in the brain, support cells, and it's physically coated onto the connections in the brain. And when baby's born, their fontanelle is crossed over, and by 3, it's stretched to its maximum. Do you see the brain is growing and stretching the fontanelle out? And the reason for that is because there's myelin being laid down on those connections and increasing the size of the brain. Unfortunately, we know from places where babies are really neglected, not sung to, not touched, their brains are physically smaller, okay, because they haven't myelinated. So experience myelinates the brain. And myelination happens in sensitive periods faster, but because of experience. So if you don't have an experience, you can't do it. Learning a language, you don't know, the language until you got to the country and started to practice. So it's repetition. And something I use as a really quick, very, very generalized example of how important myelination is and how it influences us is if I ask everybody listening to think of a word in their head, one word in English. If I said, what does a dog say? Don't say it out loud, but think of it in your head. What does a dog say? If that word is woof, it's because people have myelinated again and again. A dog says woof. Actually, where's your evidence for that piece of information? Because a dog cannot get their lips into a W movement, right? So no dog has ever said woof. That piece of information is incorrect. It's a lie. Have you taught someone of the next generation that a dog says woof? Okay, now lots of us will say yes, it's okay because it's not a harmful template. But what do our kids think about themselves? I'm useless. I can't do it. It's no use trying again. What do they think about education? It's a waste of time. It doesn't get you anywhere. What do they think about other people? Those people disrespect me. People who look like that will treat me like this. People who live in houses will be like this. And we go, oh, you shouldn't believe that. Well, I want you to reflect on the fact that you believed or possibly believed some other incorrect template because it was repeated, not because your brain checked the information. And it's really powerful to understand. So myelination happens because of repetition, not because that information is correct.
I think
Crazy, eh?
It's so great. I think I love, like, because I was listening to another session with you and you were saying about it's perceived knowledge. Our brain takes that in. So like, even though it might not be correct, it's the perceived part of it. Your brain doesn't check if it's right or wrong. It's whatever you're putting in, like you're saying, like you're putting in, repeating. We have to check that knowledge, what we're putting in, not our brain checking it. Like we actually have to like make sure that we are checking the information to see if it's correct or not correct, and checking that as well. Yeah, it's such a powerful tool to actually bring into the conversation as well. And I think that kind of relates.
Reflective practice, isn't it? Yeah, reflective practice.
And I think it does relate to like the question about screen time and about like that type of thing as well, because like the quote I loved is, have you tried talking with someone who has learned most of their rules of engagement through devices? So getting that myelination, getting that repeated interaction only from a device. And I think like that TED talk that you given about neuroscience of device zombies, it's not that you were saying screen time is bad. It's just that you were saying that actually we have to be aware of what myelination is happening, what connections, what pathways are happening if we are given devices to young children as they're developing, as they're growing. So yeah, can you give us a little insight into your TED talk about like why you think that's so important for us to know and be aware of at this minute in time.
Yeah, and what I made really clear, exactly what you're saying. It's not that devices are bad, but a lot of us think that devices are growing our brains better than we can face-to-face in relationships, and that's absolutely not true. What we know is when you're on a device, you could be growing great connections, like I said on it, we could be researching things and learning empathy. But what a lot of our people are doing is being reinvested into the same things. That's why you think you've got this view and you keep getting taught that view, that view, that view. You very rarely get challenged on devices. So there's that myelination is getting impacted. But the other thing is what you're not doing. So when we converse, like I just talked over you then, I realized I talked over you, so I stopped, and like that sort of thing. If we haven't practiced it, you watch. I was listening to these two ladies sitting next to me the other day on the plane when we're flying up, and they were talking, and I was fascinated. They were not talking, and they kept just blip, 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 and there was no conversation going on. They had their own little conversations each time. And I was like, you guys are not even in the space together. You think you are, but you're not. And learning to truly be in a conversation takes so much practice. And our kids are missing that. And so what are they doing on these screens? Yes, they're, climbing things on the screens, but are their muscles growing by hanging off the thing, climbing up on the playgrounds? So what are they repeating? And often they're repeating like I said, the facts that they believe, but they're also doing things like talking over each other, not waiting for someone else to finish. But in our gaming, we are getting rewarded for being mean to people. Most of our games get real, that they're about hurting other people, maiming other people, getting a reward for being selfish. And that's fine if you do it for a small amount of the day, and the rest of the day you're out with people and having to be kind and considerate and empathic. But what concerns me is we're spending a lot of time being sarcastic, selfish. Even the YouTube things my son watches, I listen to the language on there, and it makes my stomach tense because they're being so sarcastic to each other and so putting each other down. And I think, oh, if that's what you were listening to quite a lot, that's what you would think is okay. Just like woof, if you've repeated that, that's how you engage. And you do see some people engaging like that because they've learnt.
I think I love the idea of it's not that devices are bad, it's just being mindful of what we're teaching them through the devices, what we're using the devices for, because I think I talk a lot about creation and consuming. And I think both elements are important. We have to consume because then it helps us create, because then we consume our knowledge and we build the knowledge of what we're consuming. But like you say, what are we consuming? And I think like a lot of like even me doing my YouTube channels, like sometimes whenever my best ones are like the most shock value ones or the thing I put on there, so then I get like the tagline of the shock. And as humans, we do want shock value. Like that's what we relate to, that's what we get, that's what we buy into. But it's being aware of like that's what we are, that's what's getting sold to us, but is that the norm of what we should be acting like in our day-to-day life? And I think that's so important to be mindful of whenever we're bringing our learners into the conversation with screen time. So would you say, like, because I think you were one of the things you brought in was under sixes, there's a certain amount of time that should have on devices and what that means for them. Is there the research that you were looking at about how long they should be spending on devices for certain ages? Yeah.
The main thing on there was the World Health Organization, under 2, no devices. And that's when we're in a sensitive period for myelination. When you learnt language in the first few years, you accidentally learnt it. You just hung around language and you learnt it. Now, if you try and learn language, you have to repeat, be explicitly aware, practice, practice, practice. So in the first 2 years, our brain is so wide, it's myelinating at massive rates. So you think about putting someone on a device for 10 minutes, 20 minutes there, you're essentially doing hours of practice compared to if you were doing it later. So under that, it's no devices. And our kids are missing out. I mean, go and make a spaceship out of a box. Learn how to hold the scissors. How many kids come into school now and cannot hold scissors? They've never seen them. They've never used them. Sellotaping it back up. Where did I leave the sellotape? How am I going to do this? Using my imagination. But it's much easier to put a kid on a device and get them to build a spaceship on the device. It's cleaner, it's easier, they're quieter. You don't have to look at it, and it looks like a spaceship by the end of it. The cardboard box doesn't look anything like a spaceship. But this is the beauty of it, is that we've got to be aware of it. And as our kids get older, yes, we can balance it more. But even with our adolescents, they're going through massive myelination in early adolescence around, again, facial expression, their emotions, perspective taking. And if they're spending too much time on the device, they're missing sensitive periods of development. And that's when they're most likely to become addicted to these things and separate themselves from society and go on them.
And yeah, I think it's like Keisha said, solitary pursuits means those discourse skills aren't being developed, empathy shrinks. And I think that's like, because we made me a partner, actually, because my partner's also a teacher, and we were actually talking about this, how important it is to have individual sports as well as team sports, individual things. Because even if you watch esports, I've actually been getting really interested in what digital actually is doing for people. And so like the esports side of it, where like the amount of people are actually coming to watch the sport, so there's a lot of community built around like the physical and the digital side of it. And I think that's what I'm really passionate about, is what does digital mean? It's not that it's bad, it's about how it's used and what it's used for. And I think that's what I like about what you're saying, is like, what are they doing in the physical world and what are they developing? But also, what are they losing, getting developed by not being in the physical world and being in the digital world? That's the conversation we need to be aware of. And I think that's what you're trying to show within your conversation too, is being aware of it and being mindful and being what are we doing to our learners? Because like I think in your TED talk you said cigarettes and things like that were allowed, like they weren't seen as bad things, and now we know that they are bad things. So it's how can we be aware of actually what is the detriment, but also what is the good thing that can be coming to the table too, with both those things happening.
Absolutely. When my kids were little and they played on the computer, they'd have time. They had to play together. So they had to take turns, and then they had to go, oh, you did really well there. Oh, should you try this? No, I don't want to try that. Or maybe you should try that. And they played on the time together. So that was totally different. And you're right, that empathy, that solitary pursuit, it wasn't on their own. They had to share. They had to be time, but they still got time on the screen. It wasn't, that was cool. It was great for me. Guess what? Time out. But we've just got to be careful of that balance. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's actually a person who I just want to bring on the screen, because they've actually got, so they Adam Hill's doing a thing called Media by Example, and I love this, just being aware of like the things that are available, because he's actually trying to show that adults need to be aware of what's on the screen and what we're doing, because that's what me and my partner were saying actually yesterday. We were saying like we consume a lot. Sometimes you can waste hours just like being on the screen. You don't even realize yourself what you're doing. So I really like what Adam's doing, because it's Media by Example, and he's teaching people how to use media, and like, because we didn't grow up with the actual media itself, so it's actually getting them to realize what's available, so then we can then transfer that into our learners and allow them to see what's available as well. So he's got a course coming up in spring with Jennifer Todd, and I think it's just so important, like that example piece, us being the model, not just saying, oh, I'm on my iPhone, you can't go on your iPhone. It's actually, what are we doing to model to our learners? Because like you said, not just the facial expressions, they watch what we do, and they see way more than what we even think that they see. So yeah, it's really important to model that and be media by example in that space as well. So yeah. And so Keisha just said collaborative strategizing. Love that. Yeah, it's so important, like, to bring together, because it can be like, I love digital. I love the opportunities, like people who are connecting on here, like Keisha, she's been a past year and a half, like we've been connecting, we've been like, she's taken my learning to another level. So like, even though we haven't met physically in person, and we've actually learned so much and learned so much through each other, the collaborative spirit can be there in the digital space, but it's also, what are we aware of what we're losing by not being together too? So it's and not the either or. So yeah. I think we're going to go on to our last little question. So on this season, we've been looking at a person called Barbara Oakley about learning how to learn. Like that is like being aware of the neuroscience and being aware of what's going on in our brains and how we can bring that into the learning space. So I'm going to put a little clip on for us all to watch together, and then we'll do a little reflection of what we've actually listened to and what we've heard. So I hope we enjoy.
A higher capacity working memory, they can just hold more in mind at once. So for example, if a lecture, or let's say you've got your teacher teaching along, and the person with the higher working capacity working memory can be taking notes even while they're understanding what the professor is saying. Okay. The person with the lower capacity working memory, they can either take notes or they can concentrate on what the teacher's saying. But they can't do both at the same time. it's like just writing the notes down takes up so much of their working memory that they can't be like also analyzing what the meaning of what the teacher is saying is. And so, so it's really harder. I mean, people with lower capacity working memories, they basically have to often just be stenographers while the teacher's talking, and then go home and figure it out at their own speed, which is slower.
So yeah, that work and memory piece. The question was on there, the first part was like, how can we empathize by understanding that people do learn at different speeds? Because it actually taught me a lot looking into the work and memory space, about what it means for us and what it means for our learners. So yeah, can you give us a little insight into work and memory and what that means for our brains?
And we've always got to remember genetics. There's genetics there. So you've met people who are incredibly intelligent, but would still only listen and not write down, or, so those things. So there's genetics there, but absolutely the higher ability of the green brain means you could potentially do more things at once. It's like juggling, isn't it? And that's the top brain. And only if your feet are standing there. I mean, if you're on a unicycle, it's going to make that juggling significantly harder. So what we've got to concentrate on is creating the most stable base for our learners, creating that lower brain safety and calm. Then if they have the genetic capacity to do lots of that working memory in different areas, then they can. But even just listening, even just taking that information in is not going to be possible if their lower brain is, on that unicycle is juggling. So it's absolutely, but we also have to remember genetics means some people can't do a number of things at once. But yeah, it's that green brain capacity and being able to do multiple things, and that working memory is hugely important, because if we're not taking things in, yeah, we haven't learnt it.
Yeah. And I think like that's why I like to put it, it goes back to the empathy piece. Like you say, there's not just one size fits all with like, yeah, okay, you're working memory and you're going to hire working memory and you're in your green brain and you're in your red brain. It's like, that's why teaching's so hard as well. Because you're like, anyone can be in any state at any time. And sometimes I'm like, are you in your red brain? Are you in your green brain? Where are we all at? Like, so it's like, it's understand, am I in my red brain? Am I in my green brain? It's like, it's all those different things coming in. But what I would like to just raise is like the awareness of like those things. Oh, just checking in. Where is that person at that minute in time? What's happening with them? Where are they at? What's going on for them? And understand them a little bit more. Because sometimes when I look at my learners, maybe if they're struggling, it's like some options for why they're struggling, not just they're just not getting it. It could be that I haven't explained it correctly. It could be that they just had a bad day. It could be that they need to process things before they come and understand it, and they need to look at it a bit more before they come to the table. So there's all these different elements to actually come together and actually understand it then too. So I think like Keisha said, while learning, it's hard to juggle all the inputs, yet presenters love to talk and show graphics to provide other resources at the same time.
Good point, touche.
Like it is, it's like it's understanding like all those different spaces as well. And I think it goes back to, if you could tell us a little bit more, because I love this analogy of the sandpaper moments that you shared. Could you give us a little like understand, just because I think that really, really helps me sometimes. I'm like, what has added me up to get to this point, the sandpaper moments that you talk about?
So this goes for ourselves mostly. I usually use this analogy when I'm doing self-care workshops, but it's also about our kids, our adolescents, the other people we're working with. So I talk about the sandpaper analogy because if I touched my hand now, it wouldn't hurt. My skin is fine. I touch it, it doesn't hurt. But if I sandpapered my hand for some reason, even a small sandpaper grade, then the next time I touch with the same force, my hand is in a different state. So the interaction changes. And then if I keep sandpapering, then the interaction eventually gets to the point where that's sore. That's really painful. It's not the touch. So when you get home from work and you've had a brilliant day and you're like, oh, what shall I cook for dinner? And you're thinking, oh, I'll go to the cupboard. Oh, there's not much. Man, I can be creative. I can create something. Then you have a sandpaper day and you get home, and you open the cupboard, there's nothing there. You go, why is there nothing in the cupboard? Why is it, and so the pressure is the same. What the issue is the state of the brain, and that's that red brain, green brain continuum. And every time a sandpaper happens, it pulls us further down to the red brain. And the red brain processes things selfishly in the moment without context. So if you're a bit sandpapered and you get an email and you read it, and then the next day, you hopefully you don't respond to the email, and the next day you might read it and you go, oh, actually that's quite different to what I remember it being. Because you read it with a sandpapered brain. They hate me. They think I'm terrible, because that's what the red brain feels. And if we don't check in with ourselves, if we don't check in on those sandpapers, oh, don't worry about it, I'll get through the day, I'll get to the end of the day, we keep sandpapering. The difference is if we put aloe vera on, we pull ourselves back up to that green brain space, and we can go, oh, just a minute. Even if you don't, you get offended by that email, you go, actually, I'm green brain enough to know not to respond. Just don't respond, leave it, I'll read it tomorrow. So we need to keep pulling ourselves back up by aloe veraing, and your breathing is aloe veraing. Bring ourselves down, go for a walk, make a cup of tea, sing a song in your head, close your eyes, think of something that calms you down. That's the aloe vera to pull us back. But if we don't do that and those sandpapers build up, a little thing, and the straw that broke the camel's back, there's lots of sayings there. It's not the touch, it's the state of our brain. And that's when we start to realize the neuroscience of keeping ourselves calm and safe is so important.
And it's like, it's not like, we've all been there. We've all been in that red brain completely like, and then you walk away and you're like, why did I just act like that? That was like, that wasn't needed. That wasn't required. And like, it's like, but like what got us to that state as well. And I think that's why, with the learners as well, like whenever sometimes we're coming together and whenever the kid is like heightening us and we're getting heightened, they're getting heightened. And then, but it's actually like our responsibility to help them get back into green brain, because if we act red towards their red, it actually makes them more red and then we get more red. But actually, if we can try and be present in that and try and bring them back to the green, or just let them be in the red and be aware of that rather than igniting it, it's really important. But I think like that sandpaper moment for me is just what has added up to make that reaction, because I think like we have the quote, behavior is communication, and what are they communicating? What has happened to make them behave in a certain way? What has happened to make ourselves behave in a certain way? Like you say, are we actually reacting to the email? And sometimes it is. Sometimes the email just gets you from 0 to 100, and that's okay too. But also like what has got us to where we're at right now is a really important question to ask for ourselves, but also for our learners too. So yeah.
Absolutely. Have you ever seen 2-2-year-olds, which is our capacity of a red brain, communicate well, negotiate their way out of sharing a piece of, dress up clothing? No, it ends up with pulling, kicking, hitting, punching, spitting, and and the other thing I need to acknowledge is exactly what you're saying. I have got 2 teenagers. You can imagine that there are lots of sandpaper moments in our household. I am better because I know the stuff, but I still lose it with my kids, and I'm yelling and I'm that person, and I'm theoretically an expert on this stuff, right? Just because you have the knowledge, it is a human thing. Sandpapers happen, sandpapers build up. Forgiveness, and we use it. I say, I'm really sorry, I was in my red brain, that was on me. Or actually, you guys could have realized that I was in this space, or I realized you were and I shouldn't have asked you to do that. So it's that acknowledgement, forgiveness, understanding that we're human beings. We're not robots who stay in our green brain the whole time.
I think it goes back to the vocabulary piece. It gives you a vocabulary, and also that helps with empathy. So like, it's like if I'm saying, oh, like that person was in the red brain, instead of just judging that person for what they acted like, it's like, oh, they were in that state and I probably could have done this, or they probably could have done that. So then it gives you more of an empathy towards the person where they're acting like, because you have that vocabulary to talk to each other and actually understand it too. So yeah, it's really important to have those conversations. So yeah, I love it. Thank you so much. I'm literally buzzing. love this conversation so much. It's just really exciting to be able to understand it. And like I said, for me as a teacher, it really just helps me bring that into the classroom, and then as well bring into like my relationships too, or like with family and with like my partner and things like that. So it's cool. And I think like that kind of brings us
Can I just throw something quickly in there, because it's only what I've just learned. Dr. Perry's written a new book, so the Gentleman Neurosequential Model of Therapeutics, and it's called What Happened to You, and you're talking about the empathy, and it's beautiful. It's called What Happened to You because that's the question we need to ask, not what's wrong with you. Why did you do that? What's wrong with you? It's what happened to you. And I love it. If you're talking about that empathy space, and I'm starting to obviously use it in all my audiences now. So asking that question, what happened to you? is really cool if we want that empathic space. So just wanted to share that one because it's just come out the other day. So I'm just quarter of the way through it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited to get that one, pick up because his work is amazing. I think I've got another person on Twitter, and he Dr. Chris Murr from back home, actually back in Belfast, and he always shares Dr. Bruce Perry's work, because it's like that behaviors communication, like all those different, what happened to you, what are you communicating, like what happened to get you to the state that you're in right now, all those different things. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'll definitely I've given myself a goal not to buy any books until I've read all my own books. So that'll definitely be on the list to check off whenever I can buy new books again. So yeah, that'll be good to have. So that kind of brings us to the personal side. So getting to know the person who's on the show. And we've had a lot of the professional conversations, but also I want to get to know the person who comes on the show too and get to know you. So I'm going to put the little photograph up that you shared. And can you let us know where it is in the world and why it's a nice photograph for you to bring onto the show?
That's in the top of our North Island in New Zealand. So it's a beautiful part well above Auckland. So it's very quiet. And that was actually, I love it because it was taken by my daughter on a film camera. So she's got into film at the moment. And she's only had one film developed. And the second one, I've said to her, please don't look at it digitally because they can do it. I said, you need to go to the shop, pick up the photos and look through them. So we're very excited about the next lot of film that's coming through. I was born up in the far north of New Zealand, and I was the fifth born, and my father delivered me because the ambulance were so remote. The ambulance didn't get there in time, so my father delivered me, which is a pretty cool thing to know. So I came into the world in a little bit of a dramatic way, and I do believe it's probably impacted the way that I've lived, because I live quite dramatically, which I love. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing. Well, I love it. New Zealand, literally, like I'm probably biased as well because I literally love living there, but it is just a gorgeous country with lovely people and this lovely surroundings. So it's really nice. Like I said, whenever you first came on, I was like, oh, I'm so excited to hear your voice and hear you, and have someone from New Zealand on the show. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights today. And I put the little link for people to find you on LinkedIn and find your website. So just let us know a little about your program in New Zealand, engage in what you're working on before we end the show.
Yeah, so I train all over the country, but my website's a mess at the moment because it is being rebuilt. So in about 3 days, hopefully it's going to be up. And the reason I rebuilt it is because I'm doing some podcasts with Pio Tere, who is so Māori are Indigenous people in New Zealand. As we know, with lots of Indigenous spaces, there are more stressors, there are more sandpapers. And so we talk a lot about what we can do in that space. So they're going up. Got a few things, but I am trying to write a book at the moment, which is a bit exciting. So, but yeah, I train helping people understand this, because we need to change the way we are working if we want change, and we're not changing and we're expecting change. And isn't that the definition of madness, to keep doing the same thing and expect something to change? So I love it. I get to train people in that. So that's most of my work is talking, which I get paid to travel and talk, which if you said when I was a child, what do you want to do when you grow up, Kathryn? You know, I would never have, I would have said that exactly. Can I travel and get paid for talking? I would never have dreamed, but that's what I do.
Such great work. So I'll put the link in for your website, but like you say, it's getting updated. Is it going to be the same link, or?
It'll be the same link. They're just rebuilding it on a different one because it didn't have the capacity for podcasts. Who knows? That's called asking somebody else to do things that they know what to do. So somebody else is building it, and within the next couple of days, it'll all be up and looking beautiful again, which is cool.
Beautiful. Yes, I put the link in there. So if you want to find more about Kathryn in New Zealand, or what, like all the different things that she's working on, definitely some amazing things that you're doing. And I've put the link into your TED talk as well on YouTube too. So yeah, just like great chat, great conversation as well. So just a little before we go, I'm just putting up this weekend we have Barbara Bray coming on the show with Lauren Kaufman as our co-host, and we're going to be talking more about learning how to learn and all about this topic about neuroscience and bringing things into the conversation. So you'll be able to see that this weekend on the 8th and 9th of May. I'll put it on to our Join Live on the website, naomitolan.com as well. I'll put it all on there. Just a little reminder of our show. So thank you very much for coming on, Kathryn. And I'm buzzing. At the start of my day, what a great way to start the day for me. I'm going to hopefully have a green day. Don't know, not too. I think you just never know what's going to happen, what's around the corner. So really grateful for having you on the show, and thank you everyone for your comments and live and joining in the conversation and asking those questions too, because it was really great to have that interaction with people from America, from Hawaii, from New Zealand, from Japan. It's just so nice. That's where digital is a cool, powerful tool. Do you know, it's so many connections that we can bring, but what does it mean in our physical world as well? So yeah, thank you so very much for your prompts and your adding to the conversation today, Kathryn. Thank you. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day in New Zealand, and bye to the audience, bye to the listeners, bye to the people watching. We will see you later.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.